Hello, hello, and welcome again to another episode of Fun and Interpretation Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Alain Breton, and I'm here with Brian. How you doing, Brian?
Doing okay. Yeah. Ready for another podcast. I
Just
think
okay?
This will be number what, 21, something like that?
Something like that. I try not to keep count. And we're also here with Stephanie Lockhart. How you doing, Stephanie?
I'm great.
Well, I like to hear that. All right, let's kick it. So we'll start by, reading quickly Stephanie's expertise and experience. She has 15 plus years in national associations experience with a focus. Say it again?
50, not 50.
50, Alain.
Yeah.
No, 15. 15. Yeah. 15. I'm reading too fast. So, more than 10. Let's say,
It's more than 10.
Thank you.
Less than 20. Less than 20.
I like that too, yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. Look, okay. Let's say we cut it in post-production. Stephanie has less than 20 years experience in National Association Professional Development. She started at Canadian Bar Association in event planning and later directed major Canadian and international events, secured sponsorship and non-dues revenue for the association. Her current role is Executive Director of the Canadian Superior Court Judges, an association with approximately 1,400 federally appointed judges. She has other roles. She's the president of Cardinal AMC and Events. I'd like to know what that is. AMC is like a TV channel that I see. Breaking Bad was on AMC. Is that the same thing?
I think The Walking Dead was on too.
Yeah.
How appropriate. I didn't realize that until you guys just pointed that out.
You never thought about it?
No, because it's an association management company.
Oh.
I can't unthink that.
Okay, so
So you managed Walking Dead people.
I am, I could go so far with that. I won't.
All right, so Brian.
All right, so let's start up. Basically, am I the first interpreter you've ever met, like for conferences?
No, but Brian and I go way back, and he was a very unique one from the start. I think we calculated
Still
the
is.
years. Oh yeah, unique. yeah. Brian is. We calculated the years, right, Brian? Not that long ago. It's like.
We met in Quebec City in 2008.
Yeah.
So that dates us.
2004, the 400th anniversary of Quebec City.
That's right.
Yeah. That's exactly why we were there.
I'm from Quebec City, and I know everything there is about this city, founded in 1608, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So 400 years of... Was that for the 400th anniversary? It wasn't? It was just an event?
It was an event, a conference, but it was hosted during that year, so we incorporated a lot of the celebrations. Yeah.
But it was a unique setting because it was a board of directors meeting, and I had a specific set of skills, as Liam Neeson would say in Taken.
Yes. Yeah. Brian was performing whisper interpretation, which at that time was pretty unique. I think it still is, but it was like basically career changing and budget changing for us for things like the board meeting. So, we didn't need the full setup and the team of interpreters. Brian, for these shorter meetings, was contracted to perform whisper interpretation back of the room. He is uniquely skilled at being very discreet, but still really accurate. And it snowballed from there because, this was like a phenomenal opportunity. We then brought him to Ireland. Like, we dragged Brian everywhere.
So you don't anymore?
Yes, I just don't do as exciting. No,
We just haven't been,
yeah.
There haven't been events in Ireland lately.
No, but he is still my right hand, absolutely, when it comes to interpretation. And what's neat is that, like, it's kind of come not full circle, but like that momentum never stopped, right? So Brian stood out at that point because he was, 2 steps ahead in terms of flexibility and making interpretation accessible. Like, I think that's kind of the key thing, the key learning about all of my years of experience with Brian and his skill set is like, you have to be able to get outside of the box to make this accessible. It's important that the content of these meetings and everything else is accessible, not just English, French, right? There's so many, now I'm into these international meetings where there's no progress that's going to be made if everybody isn't fully engaged and understanding. And so it started there with that creativity and that ability to make these meetings accessible and affordable, and still accurate and everything else, like no losing of any sort of quality. But then, even today, Brian is still on that leading edge of embracing technology to do virtual and remote interpretation, to have captioning and AI, and then just incorporating that into his skill set and his offerings, which is making it way more accessible than ever before.
And just to give you an idea of Ireland, since we were talking about that, we came up with a pretty unique solution, which was for me to travel with my gear to Ireland because it was a lot less expensive. In Ireland, they don't have, or at least at the time in 2008, there was no booths that you can set up like you do in conferences in North America. They had to bring in carpenters to build a booth, and it took them 3 days to build and then a couple of days to dismantle it. And you had like multiple venues. I think you had like 5 or 6 different places. So instead of doing that, then it was a lot cheaper just to fly me with my equipment, and then I would offer whisper interpretation at all those different venues.
Are you talking about the little headsets, or you're talking about like chuchotage, like right
Yeah,
next
no,
to
when
each
we're
other,
talking,
someone's
when Steph and I are talking about whisper interpretation, it's more the portable transmitter with the microphone that's right in front of your mouth so that you can whisper, because those microphones are unidirectional. So it won't capture what's out there, but it'll capture what's coming from the direction of your mouth, basically. So it'll only capture the interpreter's voice. And it was super practical there. But yeah, lugging that equipment around the streets of Dublin was something.
Yes, didn't you since put wheels on it and get cases?
Yeah, I got the idea of like, we need wheels because oh my God, it was rough, but it was such
you didn't have any wheels?
No wheels on the equipment. They were like 50-pound cases, and I had to lug them around. Like we went to like the Dublin, was it the Opera House and a couple of hotels, and then I had to interpret for Mary Robinson, I think was the Prime Minister of Ireland. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, she had won a Nobel Prize or something. So, and she was a former lawyer.
Yeah, and former, they call it Prime Minister, I think, or President.
Yeah, Prime Minister.
Prime Minister.
Yeah.
It was really cool, and that was like Brian said, it was way cheaper and less headache to deal with, like, whatever paperwork was required to get his equipment in and back out, fly him in and back out, than to deal with this requirement of hard-walled booths and all the different venues. And
are we talking about Judge also in the Canadian Bar Association context?
Yeah, that's right.
Lawyers and judges from Canada that were invited by the Irish Bar Association, I believe. That's why they accepted the invitation and had their annual meeting there.
How did you manage the accent, Brian?
The Irish accent?
Yeah.
It was challenging, but it was good. It was good. Once you have a couple of pints of Guinness, it's easier to understand.
Yeah.
I'm not dressed in green because I knew you were going to talk about Ireland here.
Come up.
This is a coincidence.
Not to mention Lockhart. Isn't Lockhart Irish?
I'm actually Scottish somewhere down
Scottish. Okay. Well, we won't get into diplomatic fights about that. But yeah, no, Dublin was quite the experience. And also, we did try to look for the proper way to do it too, with the IEC interpreters and with the booth set up and everything. But we also, there's no IEC interpreters in Ireland, or at least at that time there weren't any. So they were going to have to come and be flown in from other places in Europe regardless. So it was that was going to be quite expensive as well. So I think one of the important things of having someone like Stephanie on our podcast is to explain also the cost that event planners have to keep into account when they're planning conferences. And interpretation obviously is one of the components. So it's important to try to find these different solutions to keep the costs down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
mean, it's really important cost, absolutely. But like that initial board meeting being the perfect example, that meeting is important and it needs to be accessible. But the associated cost of having a whisper interpreter rather than the usual full teams with the big booths and everything else, that was more in line with what you would spend or what your budget might be for a board meeting. So like it just made so much more sense. And then Brian later had as part of his equipment like a tabletop booth just for those scenarios where he is a little closer to the audience and so you don't even hear the whispering.
and then audio setups so that you could get the audio right from the soundboard. So it comes right into your ears, but you're still able to whisper. Like we've come up with so many different solutions throughout the years.
Because I went to some events where I had the portable equipment, but then I had to trust my own ears rather than being connected directly to a sound booth. I mean, not a sound booth, rather a console.
Yeah. And that's the important thing with interpreters too, is that you have to find that flexibility. It can't always be the rigid booth and that's it. And if not, then you're not going to accept a contract. You do have to find that flexibility and be able to say, okay, yes, let's find a solution to this problem. This is the budget that we're working with. Let's try to work within it. And because ultimately what we want to do is break that language barrier. And if cost is going to be a problem, then yeah, we need to find a way to help people like Stephanie who are event planners out.
Yeah, well, I always say to anyone I work with, there are no problems, only solutions. That's my attitude.
I like that.
That's why we work well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, my version of that is I don't take no for an answer, but it's the same. Same thing.
Yes, that's true.
What about have you been in and just to conclude on the trip to Ireland, everything went smoothly and everything was perfect and everyone was satisfied with there was a nice conclusion to it, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And we learned all about power conversion, right? Brian had to convert all of the power requirements for it, but no, absolutely. Everything went tremendously well. And another really valuable piece was the relationship that was already built with Brian and then thereafter with that same organization because of his familiarity with the industry, the terminology, and the members.
Yeah. And when you left the Canadian Bar Association, they continued being my client after that. And then you moved on to the Canadian Association of Superior Court Judges. And we still work together on those contracts as well. And
so my zombie business too, don't forget.
And your zombie business. Yes, the AMC.
So what's the Canadian the Superior Court Judges Association? Because there's the NJI for the National Judicial Institute. There's the Canadian Bar Association. There is now I hear about this one. I think it's the first time I hear about this one.
So we represent the federally appointed judges. So that means all of the superior courts, like the King's benches and whatnot throughout the country. We have provincial court judges and federally appointed judges in Canada. We are just the federally appointed, so the justices and chief justices. And the NJI is actually the body responsible for putting on education for judges.
Okay.
Because to maintain that independence of the judiciary and sort of that sort of buffer between them and government, they have separate bodies to facilitate education, to facilitate their logistics. For example, like although my judges are federal employees, their only liaison to their employer is through the Commissioner for Federal Judicial Affairs, so that they are at arm's length. So NJI is similar in that they are an independent body that facilitates education for judges to make sure that it is, put together and overseen by judges, and that the information and the education that judges are getting is free of any influence and whatnot.
Yeah, it's unbiased, and it's there's so many different set PD sessions that they put on too for judges. They're continuously doing professional development. It's great to see that. Do you think is the umbrella organization the Canadian Judicial Council? Do they oversee all that, or is that just a federal group or federal entity that maybe just like takes care of salaries? Or I'm not sure how that works.
We are also, so the Judicial Council is actually just a composition, a committee of all of the chief justices across Canada.
Okay.
So think of the CJC as like it's the governing body. So they are the governing body, consisted of all of the chief justices and, chaired ultimately by the Chief Justice of Canada. So they're the governing body. They would deal with, judicial complaints and everything else. So they're kind of up here. And then, under the CJC, all of the federally appointed judges report technically into them because they report to the chief justices of every province and territory. NJI, if you're looking at an org chart, is kind of, I guess you'd say, parallel to us. Like, we're an association that represents those judges, and they are the education body.
So judges are part of both. I mean, they're part of.
NJI is not a member based.
No. Oh,
no. NJI is just
for professional development.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're not an association.
So is the head honcho, is it Justice Wagner? Like he's like everybody's boss?
CJC, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Uh-huh. I love him. I love interpreting for him. He's really cool.
You see that familiarity with the industry? Brian's carved out the legal market.
Yeah, I look like the newbie who actually is asking lots of questions, and then he's the experienced one on this topic.
Yeah,
that's for
gets
sure.
It, right? And that's so important when he's trying to, he understands context when he's interpreting, right?
Yeah, and Justice McLaughlin before that was awesome too. She was so into access to justice. I loved it. Like it was really cool to hear someone who was in such a high position be like so level-headed. You know what I mean? Because it could go to your head, like if you're the head of the Supreme Court of Canada, like.
Yeah, imagine what Brian has learned over the years. He probably could get like a law degree by osmosis.
Osmosis. Can I at least be like an honorary member of the Superior Court Judges Association?
Yeah. I do not want him to be my judge, but.
No.
What about jury?
That's supposed to be unbiased too, but yeah, I don't know.
Sometimes I happen to I recently was in Vancouver for an NJI training session, and sometimes people ask me what I do, and I say, well, I'm an interpreter, and I do this, and that. And then when I talk about the NJI, people don't really understand what's going on because it's about judges, about training, etc. And I say, well, listen, and tell me if my comparison is right or not. I say, if you want to be a lawyer, you can go to university and you can get some, you do university courses. You can, do a bachelor's degree and you can have a law degree. But when you're a judge, you can't go to university. Then you need some training in order to learn how to become a judge or a better judge. So that's why the NJI is here. Is that a good way to explain it?
Similar, but instead of comparing like a degree and law school, because all judges were lawyers, to become a judge, you ultimately were a lawyer before. I would compare it to its professional development, ongoing education. So a lawyer has that requirement of like 10 or 12 professional development hours accredited every year to maintain their practicing status. A judge has the same requirement, like maybe not that many hours, but like to maintain professional development, and they can't necessarily go to, just any sort of education provider, because you want to make sure that a judge in particular is free of any bias, as Brian said, right? The information that they are getting is overseen by other judges, and that they are independent from any bias and any outside. And so that's their body. That's where they get their professional development, is the NJI.
Now, say I didn't exist, and 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 then let's say that like you were looking like you didn't know where to start looking for an interpretation company, and you were setting up this event. What would you do as an event planner to try to find an interpretation company?
Oh, that is such a scary thought, Brian. It's like, it would never begin.
I just feel like, yeah, because like there's so like you can go online and stuff, and there's so many people who like, you know, they all alter the algorithm for Google so they appear first, but they're not necessarily
Sure.
the best, you know, like and it's pretty cutthroat, and like people don't think about the interpretation industry as being large, but the language industry as a whole is huge. Like,
Really?
and it keeps on going up. Like the number of words translated every year keeps on going up. And so in interpretation, we were just talking to um, uh, uh, the CEO of the Translation
Translation
Bureau,
Bureau.
Jean-François, and he was saying like there's a shortage of interpreters in the federal government, and I often have trouble finding interpreters who are available for on certain days when it's super busy. So yeah, it's
Because it's so stressful.
mhm.
You couldn't pay me enough. Sorry.
To be an interpreter.
Oh, it takes a special kind of mind. Okay, so first of all, Brian, never get hit by a bus. Let's be clear.
Thank you. I'll try.
But I would do as I do with any other, like a supplier as important as that, like that important to the success of a meeting. I would only go to colleagues, industry colleagues, and ask for referrals and experience. Other sort of respected referral forums like CSAE, the Canadian Society of Association Executives. That's one of the key reasons why I'm a member, because those people all do what I do. So I would immediately go to that community forum and say, who's everybody using and what's your experience, right? That's where I would go. No Google. I mean, and I'm pretty confident that any experienced event planner would do the same, specific to their sort of industry.
So word of mouth is super important.
I was going to say that.
Incredibly important.
So I have a question for both of you. How, you know, you've known each other for a very long time, and Brian, you've been an interpreter. I wouldn't say forever, but for me, almost sounds like it. How, and also as an event planner, how has technology changed the way you do things now?
Oh boy, who gets to answer that first, Brian?
Well, I think it's changed for the best because I am really into technology, and I think that at first, like say the biggest threat that we've had was the pandemic, where everything shut down. I in 1 week in February, I lost all my contracts for the entire year. Like just one client after the next saying, we need to cancel. And that was incredibly frightening. It was probably the most frightening time in my career. But then like between February and say April, May, when Zoom was just starting to come out and have that interpretation function, that's kind of what saved my ass, basically.
Everyone's.
And everyone's ass after that. Yeah. Everyone's asses got saved. So in terms of the interpretation industry. So
Mine too.
yeah, and for event planners as well. Like because and AV companies got into it as well because they lost millions of dollars throughout the pandemic because all of their equipment was just sitting in a warehouse. So yeah, that technology in particular really saved our butts in the long run, and it's still being used today, which proves that it worked back then and it still works now, and it's been perfected, and other companies are trying to imitate it as well. Like Teams is slowly catching up. It's kind of like a dinosaur, but
still
it's
far away. Still far away. I can tell you that.
But I think Zoom is still probably number one for interpretation.
I like WebEx too.
I love WebEx.
I rarely use WebEx, but I think that they've developed a great platform.
Yeah, it's a good platform. Yeah. But what is it harder, Steph, to organize an in-person conference rather than an online conference, or does it depend on, is every like event unique?
You mean from a logistics standpoint or strictly
Yeah.
from the interpretation logistics?
Like as a whole.
So typically, and that was a big change for me during the pandemic, right? I was luckily already delving into the hybrid world of events where, we were putting on events, especially business type meetings, allowing a virtual audience to blend into the in-person. But over the pandemic, I learned very fast and furiously that putting on an in-person with a hybrid element, or as you asked, Brian, like an in-person versus a virtual, was essentially planning two different events. So a virtual would be slightly less logistical work because you're not dealing with getting the bodies there and the accommodation, like hotels and everything else that is involved in having physical people at an event, at a conference, in a room. But the virtual side requires a different skill set. It is still a whole lot of work, and it actually requires way more creativity to engage the audience, which again is a special skill set. Like the phoning it in and here's a link you can just watch passively via Zoom. No, you're not delivering effective education. You're not going to have an inclusive and engaged meeting. You have to make sure that anybody on the other side of that screen can interact and engage and understand the content as well as somebody sitting in that room.
But I feel that I think that one of the lessons, at least for me in the last 5 years, has been to realize how important it is to meet in person. And ironically, we're doing this podcast online. But But no, it's true. I mean, not only as an interpreter, but any situation. If I can, get to meet people and see their faces and shake their hands and see who they are, see how tall they are or how short I am, I think it's really important. And I think that human beings like to meet each other.
Human
right?
nature, yeah.
It's human nature. And I know that now because of cost and technology and accessibility and all of that, or maybe a lot of people are little hermits that want to remain at home. But I think it's important. Okay. I think it's really important to actually meet up in person. And I think you learn, especially when it comes to education.
Yes. Yeah.
I see, I don't know how younger than we are actually, young people do these days to do, I don't know, maybe their whole education online. Yeah. I have no idea, because what I remember from school are not the classes, but are the people I met.
Yeah, that's the ancillary part, right?
And a lot of the conferences too. Like I do a lot of union work too, and a lot of the professional development for unions is, so we'll give you all the material during the sessions, but then the real time where you're the most productive is off hours, like when you're talking amongst yourselves about like what's going on in your local, what's going on in your workplace, what's the health and safety concerns in your area, like, and eventually people realize that they have similar issues at the workplace, and they can work together to try to solve all of those issues, or the in-person is so important. And I think people have tried, I don't know if you have, Steph, like to have like cocktail hours or something online, or like, just informal gatherings online, and it's kind of a shit show when it comes down to it.
Yeah. I mean, it worked because it had to during the pandemic. Yes. And people didn't really have any other choice, so they were willing to participate. But now, if it's not super structured, it's an attention thing. And so I think there's actually, my opinion is there is a place for both. It depends on the content. And so the online capacity has given us the ability to plow through, productivity-wise, a lot of like maybe less intense meetings, or micro learning, like, and maybe it's not micro, but I mean,
micro learning would mean like short sessions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like webinars even, right? Like this, this somebody can digest online, no problem. But if the three of us were going to talk about a really heavy subject and we needed input from the audience, or we really needed to make an impact on that audience and push change, we wouldn't do that online. Like that
No.
needs to be in person.
Yeah,
It's a tension, you know?
the chat function can only do so much.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, certain business needs to happen in person.
Are you still teaching at Centennial College?
I was teaching at Algonquin.
Or
No,
Algonquin
I
College,
haven't.
sorry.
I haven't for a while. I haven't had the
What
capacity.
were you teaching?
Event
Event
management.
planning. Yeah, event management.
okay.
So I was just wondering, does interpretation ever come up in event management courses, or?
They do touch on audio visual, and that is part of it.
Okay.
But it's a great point, Brian. That should that should probably be part of the curriculum. I really feel like it should be taken away. It shouldn't be seen as part of the audio visual requirements anymore. I think there needs to be a whole accessibility piece, and that's where this comes in.
Yeah, I feel like there's a big push for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and yeah, not just language interpretation, but sign language interpretation and closed captioning and all. Yeah, it would be really interesting if event planning, colleges or universities that offered event planning would include that in their curriculum. Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly offered in a professional development capacity through MPI, PCMA, those types of organizations that cater to event planners. But I really feel that's why you keep hearing me say this word accessibility. People need to stop seeing it in this is part of my AV duties, because that's what it was. It was, you as the planner had to liaise with the AV company to get the headsets and get the equipment, and then go to an interpretation company who would then go and find you interpreters. And so then these interpreters would show up, and you as the event planner had this responsibility to match A to B and make sure they have what they need. And it was such a headache. And so now, and maybe I'm spoiled because I've only been dealing with Brian and his colleagues, but now it's just like, you just tell Brian what you need, and he just shows up. He will even liaise with the tech table to make sure he has what he needs. It's done. He just shows up. It's done. Check. And it needs to move away from it. This was part of, as a planner, this was part of my technology AV requirements. No, this is like a whole aspect of accessibility now, and a standalone responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And do you offer interpretation for basically national events? Like, you don't do interpretation for all of your events, I'm assuming.
It depends. So in my role with the judges, we offer it at board meetings and anything that's a bigger. We do have a policy, a bilingualism policy. For a while, we offered it even just in some of our smaller online monthly meetings with the executive, just depending on the needs of who are on that executive that year. But then on my zombie business, which is association management and event planning, it always depends on the client. So typically any national association will want to include that. Definitely any international events where you're bringing in attendees from international attendees to any given location.
Yeah,
it's always included. Yeah.
Wow, cool.
And
you're never going to refer to your business anymore as anything other than the zombie business, right?
I'm gonna rebrand. Yeah. Get rid of Cardinal.
It could also be the Breaking Bad business.
That's true.
But hold on. If we're closer to legal, the Better Call Saul was also on AMC.
This is true.
So now we're getting closer now. So maybe a little Saul Goodman.
I'm gonna rebrand for sure.
I like AMC, but
this is not sponsored by AMC, by the way.
No way, shape, or form.
Can I do Cardinal TLC in events?
Yes. So why Cardinal?
Actually, it's a few reasons. So one of the easiest linkages is that my family on my father's side is from a very small town called Cardinal.
Oh, yeah.
So it's got a little special place in my heart, but also just from a branding perspective, the color red is a strong color that is tied to leadership roles. Even the word cardinal in like religion is, the Catholic religion is a cardinal as a leader. But also, and this is one of the first sort of things that stood out in my head, is that I'm into boating. I love the water. And so cardinal coordinates, which is actually, my brand is not attached to the bird. It doesn't have it does have red, but the brand is like the cardinal coordinates, like the north, south, east, and west, like navigation.
It's a very good
nautical
name.
navigation.
If I ever start a company, I'm going to give you a call. You have some wonderful ideas.
Brian, you should have called me when you...
Well, mine is just like, it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek way to name a company, the UN Language Services, because everyone asked me what I did. I'm like, oh, I'm just like the UN, like it's just like we're doing interpretation like the UN, those things.
Yeah.
And that's the only, when people think about interpretation that and they're not interpreters, that's kind of what they think of. They're like, oh yeah, you're like the one who interprets for all those government people.
Or they think about the guys on CBC Radio Canada.
Yes.
The interpreters. I mean, like when people think about interpretation,
sometimes the voiceover.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Some like when I tell people who don't know about interpretation that I'm an interpreter, like, oh, are you at CBC? No. These I know who they are, but these are other interpreters.
And no, we've never met Nicole Kidman either.
Right.
The interpreter, yes.
Can I admit that I've never watched a movie?
Oh my.
Is it worth it?
I don't know. I think I may have watched it twice, actually. So,
well, when?
Yeah.
For the story or for Nicole Kidman?
A little bit of both, maybe.
Okay.
I find people are always confused between translation, like written translation, and interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that something that you see a lot, like at, say, CSAE or with other event planners? Do they all call it translators, or some of them call them interpreters, or does it, like, it just depends?
Yeah, I would say somebody who's not as much on the planner side would just call it translation, and not differentiate the written translation documents kind of thing versus.
Well, I think that we're very hard to pinpoint because, for instance, we're called in our professional setting when we're doing simultaneous interpretation, we're called conference interpreters, but we don't always work in conferences, right? We do all kinds of events. And then there is, well, are you a simultaneous interpreter? Are you a consecutive interpreter? Are you whispering? Are you doing chuchotage? Are you accompanying a group? There are so many different settings and so many different things that we do. Escort interpretation, okay.
We went through this with Mercedes, remember?
And you know more.
But, maybe, I don't know, should we just be called language? And maybe not language interpretation, but, or just an interpretation, like in French, well, maybe in English as well, but interpretation in French, if you just say the word by itself, it could be like theater and acting.
Yeah.
Oh.
And like or interpretive booths or something in like at a national forest.
Or for instance, Celine Dion doesn't write her songs, but she sings them. So in French, you will call her an interprète because she actually sings maybe other people's songs. So interpretation or interpretation can be confusing until like some people thought I was a singer. Sometimes when I introduced myself, I was like, oh, I'm an interpreter and in French, and people would say, oh, you're a singer. It's like,
I can see that, Alain. Yeah, you've got the stage presence.
Well, interpretation, I think a skill of interpreters is to be able to tell a story. You have to be able to resonate with the audience. And as Helen Campbell, one of previous guests, said, it's not about language. It's about being able to convey a message and resonate with the audience. And I think that this is always something that we have to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm, because it's not verbatim, right? It's not, there's nuances that.
I find it funny sometimes that like new interpreters. I went recently back to my old university just to pay a visit, and I attended a course with some interpreters, future interpreters, I would say. and they had to do side translation. Side translation is they take a text and then they will on the spot translate. Let's say in this case, it was from English to French, and it was the first experience for some of them, and some of them were having a hard time because they were translating out loud, word for word, and then the instructor stopped and they said, no,
Yeah.
look at the whole, look at the idea. You can't be just stuck on one word. You gotta do it fast. And this is what we do. We don't do words. We do ideas, concepts. We explain things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we always have a small blurb on AI at all of our podcasts. So, have you seen like an increase in the use of AI and instead of interpreters at conferences?
So what I'm seeing is that there is a lot of interest, and the AI ability is significantly improving, but that the pieces of like there still needs to be that human with the industry knowledge is fantastic, and that interpretation skill set to set it up, to monitor it, like for AI interpretation to be accurate, it needs to be like any AI model, right? This is a closed model typically, but that it needs to be fed key terms so that you can boost, and it says Alain Breton spelled correctly when it's spitting it out and captioning, right? Like, so there needs to be a lot of setup, and that setup piece is ideally done by somebody who knows those terms perfectly in both English and French and knows the context. And so, again, this is where Brian is standing out as flexible and technology advanced and embracing technology instead of putting his head in the sand.
Doesn't it add stress to use AI actually for an event planner? Because you don't know, like, there's no judgment. You don't know if the AI has been trained properly. You don't know if the terms are going to be right. It can be like any software. Half people on the street can't even turn on their printer correctly.
Wow.
Doesn't it add a layer of stress that basically dealing with human being would not give you?
So again, it would depend on the event. So if I am putting on, let's say, a very important political meeting, or things where decisions need to be made, and the audience, we need to make sure that everyone voting, is completely understood this really difficult medical terminology or whatever. No, I'd want the human, and I'd want the human that I've worked with before. But similar to that, how that whisper interpretation solved the problem of that smaller board meeting, the AI piece is great for these conferences, these education conferences where there might be a tiny segment that would maybe prefer to hear it in French, but they're also bilingual, and that, or that things that aren't maybe as serious, and there is room for a little bit of error here or there. But needless to say, anytime I've used it, I've started small and used it so that it could get smarter and smarter and smarter, and those glossaries are more populated and everything else before it gets put out to any bigger audience.
So what's the percentage you would say of the business, just to give us a rough idea of, you say, dealing with the human interpreters and AI feature? Would you say it's very minor, like 5 to 10%, or it's increasing, and a few years from now it'll be 50-50 or something like that? How do you see the future?
I do see it moving 50-50, if not a little more AI, because from my perspective, and maybe it's just my experience with the clients that I've had, but so many association events are education. So maybe not those serious like medical meetings that I'm talking about, right? So it's education, and their audiences are that, 98% Anglophone, or vice versa. Maybe it's a completely French audience with a very small Anglophone audience, or a French speaker to an Anglophone audience. But they're all pretty bilingual. But moving to like the judicial world or the legal world, and doing something international and bringing in, judges that will not speak a single word of English. Those would still be scenarios where you want the person, or a blend of both, which, like I say, is something I'm like exploring with Brian, where we have mutual clients that they're not quite ready to like just let AI do this. They still want a Brian involved.
Yeah. Well, no, I think, the only thing that I would be afraid of, I mean, I think the pie is getting bigger. So there's a lot of variety in the market. The only thing I would fear, and to be completely honest here, would be that if the pool of, I would say, I'd want to call them that way, but I will, easier conferences, if they suddenly start to dwindle, then I think that a lot of interpreters will not get the proper experience and training to be able to do the much harder ones down the road. So I think that there's a danger here that at some point there might be a shortage of interpreters at the very top, because the entry level conferences will not be as ready and available anymore. Is that a serious fear that I might have?
I'd flip that on its head and try to find the opportunity there, because maybe, I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just sort of throwing out the idea, like every time a new technology comes out and we have no choice but to figure out how to deal with it.
We have to adapt, of course.
Yeah. Is maybe it's that model where the entry level is the interpreter that is offering the AI. And so that interpreter is setting up the glossary. Or maybe for the first. What do you mean by that? So, for example, I know of one organization that is dabbling in the AI, but they want the live interpreter for the first while that they use it actually feeding the AI the French, so that it is spitting out very accurate information. And then that AI will learn because it's listening to a Brian that is spitting out the right stuff. And so maybe that's where it fits in. And then that same interpreter is like, sure, I can continue to oversee this for you and improve your glossaries or whatever over the years. But then that means that interpreter can do that with 5 different clients in one day instead of just doing one gig.
I think you've just touched a very, very hot topic among interpreters right now, because a lot of it. No, but I'm really honest with you. A lot of interpreters. I'm in some chat groups with lots of interpreters, and there a few years ago, some people have started to see that in the contracts, they were basically feeding the machine. So they stopped doing business with some of those companies, or they asked those clauses to be removed because they were fearful that they will cannibalize their own work down the road. So I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not saying I'm for or against here. I'm just saying that this is a very hot topic, what you touch on right now.
We'll do another one on this as this evolves, right? Like a few months from now, I'll probably have more ideas and more information about how it's impacting the audience. And I mean, it's like Uber and taxis, right? Uber's not going anywhere, and so you just find a way to make money off it.
Yeah.
Oh no, I mean, I think that it goes through a specialization. We have to adapt. We have to do different things with different skills. Yeah. But I think that the more you get certifications and you become professional and you develop a high-end expertise, I think the future is on high-end expertise. And I think that we have to, as humans, we have to be creative and always one step ahead. And the AI will definitely take the low-hanging fruit, but I'm always willing to climb.
It's a good way to end it. Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. It was awesome to see you again, and I'm sure I'll see you next month.
Yes.
And it was awesome. It was awesome to get this perspective from an event planner, because we usually have like interpreters or people who are like directly in the industry, but it's awesome to have a fresh set of eyes from the outside looking in.
Well,
thank you very much, Stephanie. I will also say as well, nice to meet you, and pleasure to meet you. And all right, so everyone, please like, share, subscribe, comment, everything. Every like is important. Every share is important. Please talk about it and keep watching and write comments, because this motivates us to do a lot more. So, Brian, Stephanie, thank you very much. And we'll see each other on some other episode.